furries think? Let's dive into the psychology of furries. All right, one of the things we address is whether or not this tendency to anthropomorphize animals is specific just to animals, or whether we also anthropomorphize everything in the world around us. What we find is that furries anthropomorphize animals, we anthropomorphize stuffed animals, but that's about it. We do anthropomorphize vehicles, appliances, computers, robots, but no more than the average person. So furries really seem to be quite specific to anthropomorphizing animals and stuffed animals. All right, fantasy. This is my baby because it just got published. This is like the pinnacle of my career. This is my unique contribution to psychology, so I'm quite proud of it. All right. That wasn't reading for applause. I'm just saying this is my little baby. So, okay.
Still worth applause.
So my unique contribution is this: making a distinction between positive fantasy engagement and negative fantasy engagement. Because it's really easy for people to look at furries and say, there's something wrong with those people. There's just something wrong about it. And so, despite the fact that the content is a little weird, I say it's more important to ask, well, why are they engaging in fantasy? What effect does it have? Because it's possible to have very positive sorts of fantasy engagement. It's fun, you're doing it for social reasons, it's a form of self-expression, it's all good. Or you can do it because you don't want to think about the bill you can't pay next month. That's a more negative form of fantasy engagement. And what we find with furries compared to average people is that furries have very active fantasy lives, but they're scoring higher in this healthy fantasy. So for furries, their active imagination is for fun, it's for social facets, it's for self-expression, but they're no more likely to engage in these dissociative, I can't tell the difference between fantasy and reality, or I'm doing it to escape problems in my life. Furries aren't doing that statistically significantly more than anyone else. So furries have active imaginations, but that's okay. All right, face recognition. This is a really cool study. Okay, so people asked us, are furries like bad at looking at, is that why they look at animals because they're really crappy at telling people apart? Fair question, so we thought we'd test it. So in this study, we had people look at hundreds and hundreds of faces. Furry faces, human faces, and fursuit faces. Hundreds of them. Then we gave them a distraction task. We distracted them for 20 minutes. Then we showed them hundreds more pictures, some of which they'd seen before. We said, did you see this picture earlier in the study? All right, so for human faces, furries and non-furries scored equally well. So furries aren't bad at recognizing human faces. They just do as well as anyone else. Furries are freakishly good like frighteningly good. So it's like this. Did you ever know someone who could just look at a car zip by and then go, oh, that's a 1967 Ford. My dad was one of those people. All right. And you say, well, how the hell did you know that? And so I could tell by the shape of the mirror and the wheel well. And I'm like, it was a box on wheels. So experts in a subject learn to look at tiny little features that non-experts just don't look at. And I think that's what's happening with furries. A non-furry will look and say, well, it's blue and it's got floofy ears, big eyes. And a furry's going, this is the species, this is the archetype, I know that artist probably, I know the kind of the shape of the face, I can tell what age it is, I can tell what kind of fur it is. They're recognizing far more traits, which makes them more expert at these sorts of things. So you can say that you're getting something out of the furry fandom, you're becoming an expert in a skill you'll never need. All right, here's my caveat, my warning. We're going to dive into sex and pornography right now. If this squicks you, if this bothers you, I advise you to perhaps leave right now, respectfully, just because we're talking about it. So here's my warning. So we're going to be mature about this. I do promise we're going to talk about this maturely with some data, but that's your warning. All right. So starting with violent content in the furry fandom. We do find that compared to other fandoms, the furry content tends to be less violent. But it also tends to be more pornographic. Okay, so there is more porn in the furry fandom than in other fandoms. Or at least ones we've looked at. ACON, by the way, is an anime convention. Alright, we also find that furries are statistically significantly more likely to say they're motivated by sex than other factors. That said, though, this is below the midpoint of the scale, and remember, entertainment and recreation was way up here. Belonging in innocent community was right here. So it's a motivator, but it's not the motivator. It's not even in the top 5 motivators. And we'll get some more on that in a minute. Oh, pop-ups. I hate those. All right. Pornography exists in the fandom. There, I said it. Lest you think I'm kidding, 96% of male furries look at pornography. 17% of them say that they look exclusively at furry-themed pornography. For women, 78% of female furries look at pornography. 2.2% say they look at it exclusively furry pornography. Now, what we tend to find is that male furries tend to be more positive towards pornography than do female furries. In part, this may have something to do with the fact that the fandom is predominantly male, so a lot more of the artwork is geared towards a male audience, so it makes sense that they would find it the most appealing. Now, I gave a talk recently in New York City to a room full of sex therapists and sexologists, which was really awkward. I was brought on to be I was the alternative, the really alternative sexuality guy at an alternative sexualities conference. So, and I pled the case, I made the case that furry is not a fetish. That was my argument. My thesis was that furry is not a fetish. That's not to say there is no sex in the furry fandom. That's not to say that fetishes are wrong or bad. I'm just saying that it doesn't make sense to define furry as a fetish, and here's why. When we ask furries to what extent do you prefer pornographic or non-pornographic content, furries tend to show a slight preference for pornographic content, but in general, they just like furry content. If you stripped all the porn out of the furry fandom, you'd still have a furry fandom. Now, if you stripped all the sex out of a foot fetish website, you'd have a lot of socks and some confused people. So it doesn't make sense on this ground to call furry a fetish. It just doesn't quite jive, but there's more. We also ask furries, to what extent is sex the real reason you're here? Are you here for the porn? And for a small number of furries, that's absolutely the case. For about 5 to 10% of furries, they say, yeah, I'm really just here for the porn. Now, for those people, you can say, sure, maybe for that small subgroup of the furry fandom, it's a fetish. But for everyone else, sex is there, but that's not why they do it. That's not the only reason they're here in the fandom. If it were a fetish, you'd expect to see a big spike right here that you just don't see. Now, okay, my favorite study of this whole talk. All right. We had furries look at porn for science. Oh, it gets better, don't worry. They looked at furry porn for science at a convention. That was not Anthrocon. All right. So we had furries look at a bunch of different kinds of artwork. Clean artwork, nude artwork, erotic artwork, and explicit artwork. I'll let your imaginary shoot do that where it will. It had furry and non-furry art, and it was balanced to have straight, lesbian, gay artwork. And the best part of all, we had to compare furries and they're looking at furry art to something. So we got a bunch of unsuspecting college students to do this. They signed up for a study to look at porn and they thought they won the jackpot. All right, so why did we do this? Why did we do this?
How many more furries did you create?
So why did we do this? We did this because there's this idea among furries that if a non-furry were to see furry art, they would go, these people are creeps, this is horrible, this is the most explicit thing I've ever seen, get it away. So what actually happened? Well, when it came to explicit furry artwork and erotic furry artwork, the furries rated it more pornographic and more than non-furries did. They said it was more explicit and more like inappropriate for children than the non-furries did. The non-furries just kind of went, can you go back to the non-furry stuff? So they didn't really care all that much. Furries were kind of freaking out more about how extreme it was than the non-furries were. So despite the expectation that furries had, the reality was much more tame. So I think this is sort of a reminder to furries that we like to think we're really, really weird, and some people certainly see us that way, but a lot of people just don't care. When you mention that furry porn exists, they go, whatever floats your boat. All right, other things that furries do. Furries don't tend to self-disclose being a furry very much. Now, the more you spend time in the fandom, this is a longitudinal study where we track the same furries year after year after year, the longer you spend in the fandom, the more you start to come out to other people around you about being a furry. Which might raise the question, well, why wouldn't you just tell everyone you're a furry? And if you spend any time on the internet, you know the answer to that question.
Yeah.
So when you look at furries compared to other fan groups, furries say they expect more disapproval from society than these other fan groups do. So more than other fan groups, furries really do feel like others would pick on them and look at them negatively if they knew they were furry. And as a result, furries are the least likely to self-disclose being furries to other people compared to other fan groups. Bullying. We find that furries, as a group, tend to have a pretty big history with being bullied, even before you were a furry. So especially between the ages of 11 to 18 years old, furries were 50% more likely to have been bullied, physically and verbally, than non-furries were. So 62% of furries say that they've been physically or verbally bullied through these developments, these sort of formative years during their developments, which is much higher than you find in the general population. Even more upsetting and more distressing is the fact that this is after controlling for the fact that furries are also more likely to be gay, which is something that's going to get you picked on in high school again. So furries have this history of being bullied extensively, and we know from existing research that bullying is one of the most wretched things you can do to a person. It takes its toll on you. It causes depression, it causes anxiety. Chronic anxiety takes its toll on your immune system. It seriously screws people up. And yet, when you look at furries compared to non-furries, they're doing just as well when it comes to self-esteem, well-being, relationship quality, life satisfaction, who they are as a person. What gives? They should be totally screwed up from all this bullying, but they're not. Part of the reason is because the fandom provides social supports. The fandom are the people who are there for you when the chips are down and when you need someone to be there for you. Furries help other furries, not just financially, but also in terms of social support, being there to be a shoulder to cry on or to give advice. We find that furries will turn to other furries for help if they're being bullied, if they believe that we're all kind of in this together, and if they've given help in the past. It's sort of like a karmic bank. If you're there for other furries when they need you, they'll be there for you when you need them. And indeed, when you look at what predicts giving help to other furries, the longer you've been in the fandom, the more you help other furries. The older furries tend to sort of mother and take over and help the younger furries in the fandom. Compassion, the more compassionate furries tend to help other furries, and the more you've asked for help in the past, the more likely you are to give help in the future. So the fandom ultimately is a place where you can be yourself and be accepted for who you are by others who are like you. And that's what protects you from this bullying. In a ton of other research, not in the furry fandom, but in general, having a group of people who are there for you is the best predictor of well-being, whether it's a church group, whether it's your work friends or school friends, and furries have that in spades. We got a fandom full of people who are here for us when we need it. And that's what we think is sort of protecting furries and getting rid of the harm that you might otherwise see from a history of bullying. And if you want to see some of this in action, look at post-con depression. Look what happens when you take furries away from the fandom. Now, post-con depression, if you've never heard of it before, is this idea that furries kind of get into a slump after a furry convention. For those who've been to a convention, have you ever felt post-con depression? Show of hands.
Yes.
Yes. Yep. It's absolutely a thing. So we did a survey at Anthrocon, and we tracked the same furries a week after Anthrocon. After Anthrocon, they were more bothered by things, their mind wandered more, they were more depressed, they could put, everything felt like more of an effort, they were less happy, more lonely, and less motivated to do things in their day-to-day life. So this is your first convention, be aware that this crash can kind of happen. And be aware that this is a good time to find the furry forums, a good time to sort of make sure you keep in touch with furries to sort of help yourself out of that slump.